This rescue mission was supposed to hit like clockwork. Instead, it detonated into absolute hell and rewired Soul's entire existence forever deadass. This one changed the game. This D-rank rescue hunter grinded for the Bureau of Hunters and specialized in yanking trapped hunters out of killer dungeons. Soul rolled up with his squad expecting nothing but a clean extraction run. Ghouls slammed the exit shut without warning, using his search ability. Soul spotted a side route that dumped them into even deadlier monster pack territory. The crew got overwhelmed fast, and Soul clocked a necromancer orchestrating the whole nightmare from behind the scenes. In a suicidal clutch play, this madman shoved his teammates out of the magic circle and locked himself inside to guarantee their escape. Stranded and staring down the dungeon boss, Soul battled while the beast tried forcing him into a ghoul. At the brink of total wipeout, he squeezed out his last reserves, searched desperately, and uncovered a mysterious monument offering the hidden class, Architect of Labyrinth. With 0 options left, Soul accepted and got yanked into a tutorial labyrinth, where he discovered he'd pulled off a rare reawakening. Now he had to survive long enough to lock in that fresh power. He started clearing the labyrinth and leveled up smooth until the system dropped the bomb, 4 ghouls still alive, and only 30 minutes left on the clock. This beast noted he needed to crank the pace hard. The tutorial cruised along and Soul snatched a weapon off one of the downed monsters with 0 effort. After that, he fired up his mapping skills to hunt down and erase most of the threats. It felt like a total breeze, and Soul figured he'd wrap everything inside the time limit easy. Everything flipped when a giant monster locked onto him and started charging. Still, this absolute unit stayed cocky because unlike the small fries, this one rolled solo, figuring it would eat more time and stamina. Soul decided to clear the little ones first and save the big boy for the final stretch. Before he could push the hunt, one of the smaller ghouls wandered right up and made the kill simple. Just as Soul lined up the finishing blow, the giant monster popped up out of nowhere with the last 3 small ghouls in tow. This caught him completely off guard because he never sensed them grouping up. He hadn't double-checked the map properly thanks to the ticking clock. And now this psycho sat in one epic mess. Soul steadied his nerves and plotted the next move while realizing he could only handle 2 ghouls at a time. He dropped one fast and started calculating hard. The real headache was the surround. The only exit meant smashing straight through the pack. After running every scenario like a chess grandmaster, Soul realized he sat in straight checkmate. This demon's confidence started cracking as memories of being a measly D-rank hunter clawed at his head. Yet when the monsters lunged, Soul refused to fold, no matter the odds. He reminded himself this was just a tutorial built for his gain. So he barked at the system to act like a real servant and cough up a way out since he didn't sign up to become Ghoul Chow. Right then, Soul's 6th sense skill activated. As he braced for the clash, the system pinged him with a new option. It told Soleil he could spin blocks by linking the 6th sense skill with the map function. Once the link locked in, the system spammed notifications to use the spin block skill through the map. Soul spun the block on the map and suddenly realized he could rotate the dungeon walls to reposition everything. Before the monsters clawed him apart, he slammed the spin function and trapped them on the opposite side, leaving the ghouls totally lost. Now down to 1 monster. Soul felt pretty damn pleased with the new function's effect. He spun the block a few more times to isolate the threats, then hunted them down one by one. Before long, he dropped 3 of them clean. After that, Soul swooped in for the giant monster. But reality slapped harder than expected when the beast grabbed him like a panini. Soul straight up refused that kind of, like an overpowered boss. he broke free and finished the giant ghoul with one savage strike. The system instantly declared the tutorial complete and changed his class to Labyrinth Architect. He also received the King of the Labyrinth skill, meaning every defeated ghoul now served as his labyrinth monsters. The system offered a return to a safe area. Meanwhile, right outside the dungeon, Li-Han kept trying to rush back in for him, but his colleagues held Li-Han tight because they figured Soul got devoured. Besides, the dungeon gate had already vanished, so rescue looked impossible. To their total shock, Soul strolled out casually eating popsicles and even offered them some to cool their fried brains. Soul then clocked out from work and headed to the park, where he summoned the sphere. It was his primary skill that let him imprison opponents inside the labyrinth from the outside world. Although the sphere could force enemies in, the system warned Soleil they could escape by beating the labyrinth boss. Any enemy who pulled that off would come out even stronger. Soul decided against recklessly tossing opponents inside without thinking it through. He also learned the sphere stayed invisible to everyone else, which made it way easier to use. He started brainstorming ways to stock the labyrinth with stronger monsters, because that would help him face real threats later. The only way to fill it meant defeating monsters inside and activating the King of the Labyrinth skill to make them serve him. Soul knew he'd have to get way stronger himself to pull that off. While lost in thought, his neighbor's daughter Yanni showed up and handed him a bunch of apples from her mother. Soul felt surprised by the amount and asked if it was really okay. Yanni assured him it was fine since her family always had leftovers from the store. As they walked home, Soul asked Yanni about school, and she said it was okay, even though she looked uneasy. Suddenly they froze when they heard a woman screaming in front of a hotel. She begged the police to let her through because her daughter stayed trapped inside. Yanni studied the building and pointed out it didn't look like it was on fire. Soul told her this was a dungeon break that happens when a gate gets ignored too long and the monsters spill into the real world. Soul handed Yanni the apples and promised to grab them later. Yanni asked why, and Soul explained he had to do his job in the rescue department. As Soul tried rushing the hotel, a policeman blocked him. Soul flashed his identification card to prove he belonged to the rescue department. The cop still looked confused, seeing him solo. Soul said the rest of the team would arrive soon, but the officer refused because the hotel teemed with a pack of red goblins. Soul insisted on going in anyway, especially after hearing a little girl remained trapped. The policeman kept arguing, but Soul brushed him off hard because he knew he wasn't really alone. As he stepped inside, Soul felt disappointed with the Hanel Guild since they handled gate clearing in this zone. Nobody watched the dangers because everyone trusted the guilds to handle business. Those guilds ignored small gates that weren't profitable, which sometimes caused dungeon breaks and real bloodshed. The second Soul entered the hotel. He activated his sixth sense skill and sensed the red goblins lurking in the shadows. He called them out, and they swarmed like flies, charging straight at him. Soul instantly triggered the sphere and sucked every last one into the labyrinth. He watched them from the palm of his hand like a boss, knowing the old him would have struggled hard against them. But as the king of the labyrinth, all he had to do was chill while his own monsters handled the dirty work. From outside, Soul observed his minions chasing a one-star red goblin that suddenly halted at the hallway's end. These red cretins were ordinary, but way more cunning than regular goblins because they revolved around their leader. Just as the ghoul thought it had the upper hand, the cunning goblin grinned wickedly while more comrades poured from the shadows. Before they could pounce, Soul slammed a wall in their faces and gave the ghoul an escape route. He checked the labyrinth condition and discovered the goblins had been using tricks to clear out his minions. Soul noted he needed to keep closer tabs since too many red goblins got pulled in. Still, even with their sneaky plays, they were just pawns on his chessboard, while he ran the whole game as master. Afterward, Soul reached the 17th floor and finally located the little girl Somi hiding. He assured her she was safe, and as they headed out, Somi asked if he defeated all the goblins solo. Soul told her yes, even though he knew the ghoul did most of the heavy lifting. It still counted as his win anyway. Soul felt glad he sucked them into the labyrinth because they used smell to hunt humans. If he arrived any later, they would have found Somi fast. Suddenly, the system blared a warning that over 50% of his ghouls got wiped by the goblins. Soul helped Somi into the elevator alone and told her he needed to finish rounding up the rest. After sending her away, he checked the sphere and spotted the main culprit, the Red Goblin King single-handedly shredding Labyrinth ghouls. Soul wondered about sending the king straight to the Labyrinth boss, but quickly changed his mind. He feared the Goblin King might actually beat the boss and become too strong to control. So Soul decided to enter the labyrinth himself and handle it personally. The moment he stepped inside, Soul got shocked by all the ghoul corpses scattered everywhere. He spun a few blocks through the map to halt the Goblin King's rampage, then redirected the boss straight toward him. As soon as the Goblin King appeared, it swung fiercely and vowed to finish Soul. But this demon dodged every attack without breaking a sweat. While dodging, Soul felt the huge difference in his body and stats since the reawakening. One reason he entered was to test his new skills and maybe let the ghouls finish the job. Seeing how much stronger he'd grown, Soul felt confident he could handle everything solo. As the Goblin King kept attacking, Soul stabbed his weapon into the goblin's wrist, but it broke free and struck back. Soul held his ground and even thanked the goblin for knocking him backward, because the damage to its hand was already done. Soul started taunting the goblin because it could no longer use that hand. Besides, he thanked it earlier since he had a new trick ready to test. To push the goblin exactly where he wanted, Soul kept taunting it for being weak and a total waste of space. The insults landed weak at first, so Soul cranked them up. It finally paid off when Soul called the Goblin King a wuss. Infuriated, the goblin charged, vowing to murk him. But Soul stayed planted and looked forward to testing his investment. Before the Goblin King reached him, Soul activated a repulsion device that froze the monster in place. With a smug grin, Soul said farewell and triggered a spiked ceiling trap that crushed the Goblin King into pulp. Even though it cost 20 gold, about 2 million won to install the trap, Soul felt thrilled with the investment. The effect looked so clean, he actually started feeling guilty for anyone who might get caught in it later. Just then, the system announced another level up and added the defeated Goblin Pack to the Labyrinth via the King of the Labyrinth skill. Afterward, Soleil stepped back out into the hotel, where Lihan scolded him for entering solo. Lihan asked if Soul really handled the goblins alone, but Soul played dumb and claimed he hit his head. Lihan didn't buy it because police already reported the goblins vanished the second Soul went inside. Soul had zero plans to reveal anything, so he playfully told Lihan to buy him meat in exchange for the truth. Suddenly, Shangun, the manager from the Hanel Guild, interrupted and asked to speak with them. Lihan agreed, and first Shangun thanked them sincerely for helping resolve the dungeon break. But Soul and Lihan felt disgusted that he made it sound like the guild helped clean up. Shangun then asked them not to speak to reporters because the guild didn't want the public knowing. He promised to compensate the hotel for damages and warned that negative news could make people anxious. He also offered a generous donation to the rescue department. Even though Soul felt furious, he knew the painful truth that the man was right. Unlike the Bureau of Hunters filled mostly with measly D rankers, guild hunters reached up to S rank. People trusted the guilds more and believed they held real power to protect them. But Soul hated how the guilds exploited that same trust to do whatever they wanted. Soul knew he couldn't change it no matter how much he despised the system. Refusing to let it slide completely, Soul patted Shangun on the shoulder with just enough strength to intimidate. Soul gave a weary smile and agreed to the request because he didn't want unnecessary attention either. Soul also knew the Hunters Association would bury any big story anyway. Still, he refused to let the Hanel Guild walk away clean, so he bluntly demanded 10 billion won donated to the rescue team. Since they kept cleaning up the guild's messes, Soul intended to bleed them dry. He pressed harder on the shoulder and asked if Shangun could match the offer. Shangun looked shocked but couldn't speak because Soul already scared him into a code brown. After handling the dungeon break, Soul earned a 2-day vacation, so he headed to the park to relax. He felt proud he solved everything without casualties and even extorted serious cash from the Hanel Guild. The only downside came from co-workers staring at him with a million questions because he soloed a pack of red goblins. But Soleil refused to tell them anything to avoid drawing attention. If word got out, Soul feared it could hit headlines and pull guild eyes his way. So he used the vacation to focus on maintaining the labyrinth. First, he calculated repair costs for damaged walls and respawning monsters. The labyrinth used the universal hunter currency of gold. After crunching numbers, Soul realized it would cost about 53 gold, insanely expensive, equal to 5.3 million won, or twice his monthly salary. Despite the crazy price tag, Soul still decided to proceed, since he carried around 80 gold already. Before Soul could finish the process, Young-hai from the monitoring department called and irritated him. He snapped at her to get to the point because he was supposed to be on vacation. Young-hai fired back that his version of vacation probably meant chilling in the park. She asked him to use his seeker skills to track someone for her. Suddenly, the line went dead, and Young-hai realized Sola hung up on her. Young-hai sat shocked and couldn't believe his nerve. Meanwhile, after hanging up, Soul instantly forgot about it and went back to thinking about his labyrinth. He decided to save some gold instead of respawning every monster, since he could step in personally from time to time. As he weighed which plan worked better, his phone rang again and irritated him more. Soul picked up and barked at Young-hai to track the person herself, because that was monitoring department work. But she begged him to save a damsel in distress, and even offered to buy him beef. Soul wasn't interested in playing Prince Charming, but the beef offer briefly tempted him. To seal the deal, Young-hai assured him he'd agree once he heard the name. Soul asked who it was, and Young-hai revealed it was Tan, which instantly piqued his interest. Considering Tan's caliber, Soul wanted to meet him once, so he excitedly agreed to Young-hai's request. Shortly afterward, Soul arrived at a spot and observed a bunch of old guys playing Korean chess, even though he never met Tan in person. Soul tracked the man's strong, dark red aura all the way there. That aura only belonged to powerful awakeners, so it stood out even from far away. Soul studied him closer and wondered if this scrawny old guy could really be the legendary Tan. Just then, Tan's game partner caught Soleil staring and asked if he knew how to play Korean chess. Soleil said he could play a little, so the man asked for advice on his next move. Soul started giving advice, but before he finished, his sixth sense activated signaling danger. As Tan moved to strike him with a chess piece, Soul dodged fast, and the piece slammed into a tree behind him. The other old men hurried off to take a few shots for the gram. While Tan scolded Soul for being nosy, the attack only confirmed this really was the legendary Tan he was sent to track. Tan ranked as one of the 5 S-rank hunters in Korea, and stayed famous for turning anything in his hand into a deadly weapon. Before Tan could move again, Jung-hai interrupted him. Tan asked Jung-hai if she came from the monitoring department, but she said Sol was a seeker from rescue. Tan slightly praised Soleil's skills, yet called him arrogant, and Sol playfully accepted the compliment while hyping himself up. Jung-hai told Tan she searched for him because monitoring department trainees gathered for his lecture. Tan agreed to go back with her, and Jung-hai asked Soleil how he tracked someone the whole department couldn't find. Sol boastfully answered it was because he stayed quite capable. He prepared to leave, but Tan told him to follow because he wanted to confirm if Sol had real talent beyond the arrogant mouth. At the monitoring department trainee gathering, Tan gave the crowd a quick demonstration. He explained every Awakener had a maximum capacity, so a C-rank hunter could never escape being C-rank. Yet he said the system could get tweaked depending on one's will. Since martial arts couldn't be measured by numbers, Tan told them they could grow stronger based on weapon expertise. While Tan pumped the crowd with his motivational speech, Sol blanked out because all he wanted was to study his labyrinth again. Suddenly, Tan barked at a guy named Seo, standing beside Soleil, and asked how long he trained under him. Seo answered 4 months. Seo turned out to be one of the few B-rank hunters in the monitoring department. Tan commended Seo's talent and asked what he thought was required to wield a sword. Seo answered with determination that overwhelming strength and skill understanding were needed. Tan paused, then threw the same question to Soleil. Instead of thinking long, Sol casually said the will to wield the weapon was what mattered. A disdainful chatter erupted in the crowd because of his answer, and everyone preferred Seo's response. They also pointed out Sol wasn't even a trainee of their department. Tan noted Sol answered too casually and asked if he felt sure. Sol said he felt certain and felt impressed. Tan stayed sharp enough to see through him. Tan called Sol out for the nonchalant attitude, but still announced the answer was correct. Seo looked unhappy, and Sol felt even more puzzled, yet thanked Tan anyway. Seo angrily questioned Tan's decision and refused to accept it, since Soleil wasn't a trainee like him. Sol felt confused by Seo's childish outburst, while Tan told Seo anyone qualified could stand on the stage. Taeyeon announced he would give Sol an equal chance like Seo to pass the test, and all they had to do was prove their answers. Seo accepted the challenge, but Sol immediately rejected the offer. Tan asked him to reconsider because anyone who passed would become his disciple. The thought of becoming disciple to an S-rank powerhouse instantly hooked Sol. Besides learning to grow stronger, it offered a chance to rise higher. Seeing Sol tempted, Tan asked if the offer interested him. Sol hesitated a second, then decisively accepted. Afterward, they moved to the test location, and Tan told them they had to use the skill he would pass down to smash an ether stone. He promised to take as disciple anyone who broke off as much as possible from the stone. This task looked daunting because the ether stone was a rare temple-only find, imbued with magic power that only powerful awakeners could break. Sol wondered what Tan meant by passing down a skill, while Seo, determined to win, pumped the crowd for support. The crowd cheered for Seo, while Soleil made up his mind to grab this opportunity no matter what. Tan prepared to pass the skill, but warned they would get disqualified automatically if they felt nothing. As he began transferring the skill to Sol and Seo, a terrifying red aura slammed into them. Sol's system instantly detected the aura, but before he could process it, Tan's aura nearly sucked the breath out of him. Still, Sol stayed determined to endure until the end, to receive the skill. Just when he started losing consciousness, A sudden calmness hit Sole as he saw the skill Tan passed down. A spear appeared before him, and the system notified him he acquired the Serene Mind skill. It also informed him he mastered the Dragon King's spearmanship. As Ta'an noticed their expressions, he commended them for having the right aptitude to receive the inheritance. Normally, others felt nothing or passed out before getting the skill. Afterward, Ta'an asked who wanted to go first, and Seo immediately stepped up. Seo felt determined to blow minds and keep Sole from even thinking about challenging him. As he prepared to swing at the stone, he cursed Sole under his breath, accusing him of buying his way with money. He couldn't understand how a useless D rank withstood Tan's skill inheritance. Determined to prove superiority, Seo used every ounce of strength and chopped off a large chunk of the ether stone with his sword. The crowd stood amazed by Seo's power and felt his talent got wasted in monitoring. Tan noted Seo mastered the Dragon King's swordsmanship. After the demonstration, Seo taunted Sol, telling him to know his place as a junior. Sol fired back at Seo for the inferiority complex and constant need to prove himself. Before the roast escalated, Tan told them to cut it out and informed Sola it was his turn. Sol stepped forward, thinking he only responded because of Seo's condescending tone. Though he knew he couldn't match Seo in pure power, Sol refused to let it bother him because he believed the test was about willpower, not strength. This was his chance to prove his answer was right, and Tan already confirmed it earlier. Even though he answered casually, Sol felt certain. He stopped to think why his answer was correct. The moment he remembered the rescue hunter who once saved him, Sol finally found his answer to become like that hero. Just like that hunter. Sol became a rescue hunter to let people feel the same hope he once felt. To do it, he knew he had to grow stronger than he was now. With that thought, Sol poured everything into his spear and activated the Dragonfire Heartpiercer skill. He unleashed a massive flame that completely destroyed the ether stone and left the crowd, plus Seo stunned. As Sol walked back to position, he smugly apologized to Seo, pointing out a junior just stole his spot. Tan commended Sole for unleashing the true power of his weapon, because only someone who truly knew himself could do that. Tan declared Sole would be his disciple, and Sole happily thanked him while the crowd cheered. Elsewhere, Yonhi got cornered by a bunch of bullies led by their leader Gintai. A blonde bully taunted Yonhi, saying she ended up like this because she played nosy Karen helping a friend. Apparently, Yonhi slapped Gintai for bullying her friend, which only enraged him more. It got worse because her friend later tried ending it all to escape the bullies. Gintai mocked Yonhi about the incident, reminding her the friend still fought for life in the hospital. Yonhi glared enraged, but that only excited Gintai more. He slapped her immediately, but before he continued, a B-rank hunter interrupted. Gintai told his friends they were leaving and warned them to make sure Yonhi didn't escape. He also told the hunter to follow, because he called him to take them somewhere empty, so they could play with Yonhi however they wanted. Meanwhile, as Young-hai walked back to work, she commended Sole for becoming disciple to an S-rank hunter. It turned out Tan asked Sole to choose a weapon, and he picked a spear. Young-hai felt skeptical about the choice, but Sole told her it was perfect, because to her it looked ordinary. But his system already detected it was a spear of evolution called Loga. The spear could evolve into different forms matching the user's will. As soon as they arrived, Young-hai complained it passed her clock-out time. Sol mocked her for being tired, despite doing nothing all day at monitoring. This infuriated Young-hai, and she tried pouncing, but Sol pushed her back with one hand while noticing commotion ahead. A tired-looking woman tried convincing the security guard to let her see Solo, but the guard stopped her. He told her to call, but the woman said she already tried, and Sola never answered. Just then, Sol interrupted their argument and asked what was wrong. The woman grabbed his shirt with a breaking voice and told him Yoni got dragged to the yellow belt, revealing she was Yoni's mother. This immediately upset Sola, and he asked who did it. Inside the yellow belt, one of Gintai's minions asked if it was safe being in such a dangerous place. Gintai assured them it was fine, since they brought a B-rank hunter for security. He proudly declared he wanted to see who would win if Yoni fought a monster. Seeing how scared Yoni looked, Gintai taunted her, more assuring her the yellow belt monsters were weaker. Scared out of her mind, Yoni bolted, because she knew Gintai was crazy enough to force the fight. Yoni raced forward, determined to escape the lunatic somehow. But before she succeeded, Gintai ordered the hunter to stop her. The hunter tripped Yoni with his leg, causing her to fall. Yoni screamed for help at the top of her lungs, but the blonde bully told her to save her breath because no one else was around. The hunter then sensed something watching from the shadows and told everyone to step back. Because Gintai already said the monsters were weak, the blonde ignored orders and became the first dumb one to die. The hunter rushed forward to block the remaining stingers, while Gintai froze, terrified seeing the blonde's lifeless body. The hunter told him to run back the way they came. But Gintai felt too scared to move and asked who attacked them. The hunter told him they were stinghawks, a large kind of monster hornet. Meanwhile, Sol already made his way into the yellow belt and called to thank Young Min, who helped track Yonhee. Young Min belonged to the combat class and first located her whereabouts. Sol thanked him, but Young Min said he only responded to a missing person report. Even though he warned Sol against going in alone, Young Min still told him to be careful, but Sol wasn't too worried about his own safety. After the call, Sol looked around the now miserable yellow belt, but it wasn't always like that. The yellow belt got sealed after the area turned uncontrollable from a dungeon break. Though the monsters here weren't strong, they stayed far more cunning and difficult to handle. Sol confirmed this because he already took out a few upon entering. He noted they seemed weaker, but still too much for someone like Yoni who hadn't awakened. So Sol hurried to search for her. Soon the hornets attacked him again. Instead of fighting solo, Sol prepared to send them into the labyrinth because time ran short. He told them to call the rest of their friends, but when they actually arrived, he felt uneasy about the huge number. As they began their sting operation, Sol ran for his life only to get cornered. Despite sending a large number inside the sphere, they kept appearing, making him realize he sat in deeper trouble than imagined. The number of monsters inside the labyrinth dropped fast. If he forced any more hornets in the labyrinth might collapse. Besides, Sol knew he couldn't handle the outside ones alone either. So he did something drastic and sucked up every hornet outside into the sphere before forcefully dumping a huge pond into the labyrinth. Just as the hornets were about to colonize everything, they froze, sensing something rushing in. Before they reacted, a massive stream of water flooded the labyrinth and drowned them completely. Sol's heart ached, watching the damage to his precious kingdom, because he knew repairs would cost an arm and a leg. That insane cost was exactly why he hesitated using this method earlier. Still, he felt glad it cleared the hornets chasing him outside. Elsewhere, Gintai and his group still fought to survive, and Gintai started losing patience with his useless B-rank hunter. The hunter said the bugs were too much to handle alone, but that only pissed Gintai off more. They already lost their exit, and now he was stuck with a spineless so-called B-ranker. To make it worse, Gintai's second minion with the Little Red Riding Hood vibe soon got impaled by hornet stingers. That was the exact moment Gintai realized he messed up majorly by entering the yellow belt, just for fun. As the hornets surrounded them, the hunter handled the ones behind, while Gintai ran his mouth, telling him to cover the front too. As one hornet charged Gintai like every selfish menace grabbed Yanni to use as a human shield. Luckily, someone struck the hornet down before it harmed her, leaving them confused. Instead of gratitude, Gintai barked into the shadows, asking who it was. Irritated by the tone, Soleil appeared and introduced himself as a bureau hunter. He angrily asked Gintai if he dragged Yanni into the yellow belt. Yanni felt emotional, realizing Soleil came to rescue her, and rushed into his arms. He asked if she was okay, pointing out it was the first time he saw her cry. Gintai interrupted their reunion and offered to pay any amount for the exit out of the yellow belt. Yoni told Soleil to ignore the trash, but Soleil's face suddenly turned dark. He apologized to her, but before Yoni could ask why he knocked her out, Sol gently placed Yoni on the ground and promised to get home after cleaning up the waste. Shocked, Gintai asked what he was doing, and Sol said he was about to do something he didn't want Yoni to witness. He slammed his spear into the ground to stretch his fist for what came next, but Gintai, too dumb to realize he sat in deep trouble, kept mouthing off. He pulled the classic, "Do you know who I am?" card, but to his surprise, Sol said his face was quite famous among bureau hunters. Sol revealed Gintai was the son of Bumjin, a judge of the Supreme Court of Justice. Apparently, Gintai was infamous for bullying, theft, and all sorts of crazy crimes. But thanks to his father's influence and money, he always paid his way out. Seeing Sol already knew his record, Gintai thought he could intimidate him, so he fearlessly faced Sola, asking what he planned to do about it. Sol simply kicked him in the shin, and Gintai's brain buffered a second before collapsing from the pain. Sol refused to give him breathing room and immediately started using him as a punching bag. He told Gintai to try paying him off since that was his favorite guilty pleasure. Sol beat him a couple more times, but before continuing, the hunter stepped in. The hunter swung at Sola, but Sol dodged fast and let Gintai go, seeing the bodyguard finished clearing hornets in the area. At the same time, Gintai felt ecstatic and started mouthing off again because he believed his useless hunter, who couldn't handle weak hornets, would definitely crush a mere D-rank bureau hunter. Unfortunately, Sol moved at lightning speed, dodging every attack the hunter threw. At the same time, Sol already felt pissed because he planned to let them off with a warning. But with the hunter trying to kill him, Sol decided to finish them completely and chalk it up to self-defense. As they fought, Sol pulled out all the big guns, leaving even the hunter puzzled, because bureau hunters were supposed to be D-rank. Yet Sol's strength somehow surpassed his own, making him question everything about ranks. At some point, he even suspected Sol might not really be a bureau hunter. Still, the hunter felt he could gain the upper hand since Sol's weapon was just a spear. He decided to close the distance, convinced that once close, he could cut Sol down. Reality hit different, though, because the moment he got close enough, Sol grabbed his hand, as if waiting all along. Sol then punched him straight in the face, giving a much-needed facelift that knocked the hunter out cold. Gintai looked horrified and frantically called for protection. Unfortunately, the hunter's spirit already went on vacation, making Gintai question if he was a Nepo B-ranker. At this point, Sol realized he just effortlessly took out a B-rank hunter. He noted it must be because of the stats gained from defeating those hornets earlier. So his strength probably surpassed B-rank level now. Sol smirked at the thought, which only annoyed Gintai more. So Gintai decided to stop being a wuss and picked up a stone, foolishly hoping he could do what a whole B-rank hunter couldn't. As he rushed forward, Sol felt puzzled, but stayed calm, and with only a light swing of his spear, knocked Gintai down. Sol then asked how it felt to be on the receiving end of the stick. He told Gintai his victim suffered even more than this. But Gintai stayed unrepentant and told Sole to suck it up, since he had neither money nor power, and that's how the world worked. Seeing the punk learned nothing, Sole decided the world would be better without a hopeless piece of trash like Gintai. This made Gintai a bit scared, but Sol didn't plan on lifting a finger against him. He simply picked up Yonhee and told Gintai he would leave him to the hungry ones in the yellow belt. Before Gintai realized what happened, sinister eyes appeared from the shadows, and soon a pack of monster wolves emerged. Gintai frantically barked at them to back off, hoping the universe would somehow let him control animals. But that didn't happen as the wolves pounced on him, while Sole quietly left with Yonhee in his arms. After leaving the yellow belt, Yonhee reunited with her family amid touching tears. Youngmin informed Sole that the officials who helped Gintai enter the yellow belt got apprehended and purged from their offices in the athlete department. He also speculated things might get hectic in the city for a while. Just as predicted, the incident caused widespread outrage as officials faced discipline. Even Gintai's father came under fire and had to resign from the Supreme Court of Justice to settle everything. After the incident, Sol received a quest from the system to hunt the Queen Hornet in the yellow belt within 30 days. On success, he would get a stinger dagger, 100 gold, and Queen Scepter's royal jelly. The penalty for failing meant losing 50% performance against insect-type monsters. Sol recalled briefly seeing the Queen Hornet on his way out of the yellow belt. Even though he knew she wasn't easy since she stayed protected by her swarm, Sol still felt excited for the quest. He noted the queen must be quite powerful because her workers almost wrecked his labyrinth. Afterward, Sol told Lehan he was leaving early because he had somewhere else to be. But when Lehan asked if he finished all paperwork, Sol froze for a split second before practically vanishing. Since he had 1 month until the Queen Hornet quest expired, Sol reasoned he needed to prepare because the depleted swarm would rapidly expand its territory again. Sol soon arrived at a temple where Tan told him he was late and ordered him inside because training started immediately. Upon entering and changing into dojo uniform, Sol finally digested the fact he was Tan's disciple. But the old man told him not to ride that fact because 2 other disciples ranked above him. In addition, the training volume would choke him. Ta'an led Sol into the training room, where he met one of Ta'an's senior disciples, Gunsu. Sitting in the room was the jawbone of an iron monster, a unique variant existing nowhere else. With battle scars all over its back, Ta'an admitted the monster was the first thing that nearly sent him to the afterlife. Ta'an walked to the jawbone and told Sole this would be his first task. Ta'an grabbed the handles placed on the jawbone and pulled them apart with immense strength. After showing what needed doing, he let go, admitting the jawbone stayed as stubborn as ever. Gunsu clapped for his master, commending him for always being incredible. At the same time, Sol felt blown away by the man's ripped muscles. Ta'an then told Sol to try what he just did, and Sol agreed. He walked over thinking about how he already surpassed B rank and might not open it fully like Ta'an, but he planned to move it at least. Sol couldn't even budge the jawbone open, and Ta'an looked even more surprised it didn't move at all. Sol refused to believe it and kept struggling, while Ta'an said the training would build physical strength, so he should continue until he succeeded. As Ta'an left, he told Sole there would be no next stage until he pried the jaw open. Deep down, Gunsu felt unimpressed and concluded Sol was just a nepo baby. The next day, as Gunsu made his way to the training hall, he realized he worked harder the past 2 years than anyone to prove he deserved direct disciple status. But in the end, Soul got the spot instead. Gunsu wasn't happy. It wasn't another B rank like him, but some random bureau dude. Because of all his hard work, Gunsu felt it wasn't fair. He got sidelined. He stepped into the training hall, and to his surprise, found Sole already there, cleaning. He greeted with a tense voice, and Soul urged him to speak more comfortably because he was the rookie. Gunsu replied he might be okay with that, but he wasn't, and looked around, seeing how sparkling clean the gym looked. He felt blown away and asked if Sole cleaned it himself, and Sole said yes. Gunsu walked off, urging Sole not to do it again because it made the rest look bad when the direct disciple handled chores. Soul felt taken aback and asked if there really needed to be hierarchy for things like this. Soul said he had time on his hands and just decided to do it. He believed being direct disciple didn't mean dumping work on others, since they were all there to get stronger. Gunsu stared at Sole and couldn't believe how annoying he was. Gunsu watched as Soul kept coming to training for the next 2 weeks, and even stayed later than anyone just to train more. Gunsu realized, despite being direct disciple, Soul never threw weight around or looked down on anybody. Soul basically trained like his life depended on it while getting along with everyone. Gunsu found no fault in him, and that pissed him off even more because Soul was exactly the kind of person he wanted to be. Sometime later, Soul almost succeeded in pulling the jaw open, but failed again. His hands bled all over the handle from constant gripping. Just then, Gunsu walked over and gave him a bottle of water. Surprisingly, Gunsu told him not to overdo it, and Soul felt surprised he finally dropped formalities. Soul took the bottle and was still drinking when they heard a loud horn in the distance. Soul asked what it was, and Gunsu said it was the deployment signal for the Overcross Guild. Apparently, the Overcross Guild headed into a nearby dungeon that day. Soul felt surprised they operated at that hour, and Gunsu said Overcross actually worked 24/7. Soul felt surprised Gunsu knew that, and Gunsu revealed he worked for Overcross briefly. The following morning, the Overcross Guild stepped out of the dungeon after successfully capturing a steel blood orc. One hunter asked his colleagues if it was actually legal to poach monsters this way, and the reply was technically no, but the orc they captured would sell for at least 12 billion won on the black market. He said they paid salaries with moves like that. One of them held the orc necklace, and the moment the orc saw it, he started losing his mind. The 2 idiots started mocking the necklace and even decided to throw it away, but that only made the orc go crazier. Elsewhere, Soul and his team just finished a rescue mission, and he was about to leave for the association. His team leader reminded him of the team dinner, but Soul said he couldn't make it, because his master told him to look after the rest of the disciples while away. Suddenly, the emergency alarm sounded requesting support, because a 3-star boss monster being transported illegally broke loose and rampaged. Surprisingly, the incident happened at the Korean Martial Arts Association. At the association, the orc already caused total destruction, smashing everything and leaving Gunsu battered and helpless. Gunsu reflected on everything that happened so far and how he always considered himself a genius. He also believed it was right for the strong to exploit sub-guilds. However, the day his own men abandoned him and left him to die made him realize how wrong he was. He realized he was just another replaceable cog. Gunsu also realized the world stayed cruel and rotten. Nonetheless, he believed good people still existed because someone saved him, and he tried living up to that standard by making the world a little better. Gunsu got back on his feet instead of giving up in front of the orc, and screamed that everything he survived pushed him through 2 years in that hellhole. Gunsu pointed his half-blade at the orc, even though moving hurt. Still, he figured he had to hold out as long as the orc focused on him so the other disciples could escape. Just then, the orc threw a punch and Gunsu felt too tired to dodge. He already pictured his head flying off when Sole showed up blocking the punch while commending Gunsu for doing enough. Sol urged Gunsu to leave the rest to him and activated the labyrinth, dragging the orc inside. The moment they arrived, the orc wasted no time chasing Sol around. Sol didn't expect the orc to stay that aggressive and monstrous. He couldn't believe the orc just fought the Overcross Guild, yet still had this much energy. The orc chased through labyrinth halls, crashing walls like it was on a rampage. Sol finally halted and admitted he couldn't take the orc alone, so he needed support. Sol immediately released the red goblins to surround the orc. They lunged, trying to overpower it, while Sol looked for an opening. However, the orc stayed so strong, it tore into the goblins like paper. Sol watched his minions get shredded by the monstrous orc. Sol felt pissed at how much damage the orc did to his labyrinth walls after he spent so much fixing them. He realized the goblins wouldn't create the opening he wanted. Even though he didn't want to use his high monster because of the risk, Sol knew he had no choice now. Sol then summoned the labyrinth boss Kaori, who engaged the orc in a fierce fight. Kaori struggled against the orc, but this bought Sole time to lunge at the orc's head. He pushed his spear into the orc's head, but it wasn't enough to kill it, as the orc still crushed Kaori. With Kaori defeated, the system told Sol respawning was currently unavailable. Sol pulled back, angry that the orc killed his labyrinth boss. In annoyance, he activated the Hall of Steel trap. Arrows rained on the orc, and Sol used the chance to cut the orc's leg with his spear. The orc crashed down, and Sol triggered the spike ceiling trap, which immediately crushed it. It flattened the orc, and Sol commended his own ingenuity, because he stacked every trap in that area just in case the orc went rogue. Just then, he got a warning. The labyrinth's durability dropped to 72%, and it would vanish automatically at 60%. In addition, all monsters would be eliminated, and Sole grabbed his head in frustration because losing the boss hit hard. Still, he knew he would have died without the labyrinth. Suddenly, the ground shook, leaving him wondering what happened. Before he knew it, the orc pushed through the floor and looked even more dangerous than before. The system told him the orc began its final struggle, and Sol admitted the orc was strong. Since the labyrinth wouldn't hold much longer, Sol decided to return outside because he believed the association evacuated by now. He planned to finish the orc once he had open space. Meanwhile, Gunsu wandered, wondering where Sol vanished. Suddenly, the gate opened right beside him. Before he understood what happened, he saw Sol and the orc exchanging blows. While fighting the orc, Sol noticed something strange. He realized he actually kept up with the orc and wondered if it was because the orc felt exhausted. However, he discarded that thought when he realized his own attacks landed heavier than before. Even though the orc's attacks felt heavier, Sol tanked them because his body felt completely different, which meant the 2 weeks of training paid off. In fact, he felt like he was being torn apart. But power kept shooting through his body, and he sensed growth in his bones. Sol dashed toward the orc, pushing his spear in with a smile, because he finally enjoyed the battle. He hadn't finished the thought when the orc grabbed his spear, and the moment he got restrained, Sol got slammed into a distant wall. Sol coughed blood while trying to recover. He realized the orc actually took his weapon, because it believed Sol couldn't pierce its hardened blood without one. Sol commended the orc because it might look dull, but actually stayed smart. Just then, Sol turned and saw the jawbone sitting behind him, and an idea hit. At the same time, Gunsu lunged at the orc, saying he would buy time so Sol could grab a weapon. Gunsu hadn't finished speaking when the orc slammed him into the ground. Sol dashed toward the orc, telling Gunsu he already found a weapon. Since the orc focused on Gunsu, Sol realized he had a chance. Sol grabbed the jawbone, knowing this would take every last bit of strength he had. A burst of energy shot through Sol's body as he commanded the jawbone. He pulled it open and released the lever on the orc's head. The jawbone clapped shut, decapitating the orc relatively easily. The orc's body crashed down, and the system informed Sol he acquired a unique grade item, the demonic dagger. Sol thanked the orc because it helped him finally solve the one thing blocking the next stage of training. With the orc defeated, Sol walked over to Gunsu to get him to open his eyes because he was losing consciousness. Sol screamed at him not to sleep, and that jerked Gunsu back to life. Sol teased him, saying he had 9 lives. And to Gunsu, what he saw was an angel saving him. When he told Sol, he was the one, Sol didn't totally understand, but just teased back that no one else would look after him. Still, Sol urged Gunsu to chill because it was all over. The next day at Bureau headquarters, reporters and news agencies crowded the building. Not long after, the director of Overcross Yunwan showed up, and all attention shifted to him. Reporters asked for a statement about what happened, while others asked if he admitted the incident happened during illegal monster transport. Yunwan finally made a statement, offering apologies to the victims. He said the steel blood orc held immense research value, and they only brought it in to donate to the Bureau despite the risks. Yunwan said he had no further comments, while assuring full cooperation with the monitoring department's investigation. Just then, one reporter spotted Sol in the back and called everyone's attention to him. They rushed over, demanding comment on the incident. They asked how a D-rank hunter took down an orc, but before Sol answered, his team leader dragged him away, saying they had work. Suddenly, one reporter commented the Bureau wasn't giving an adequate response. He continued, saying the Bureau existed to monitor and coordinate with large guilds to prevent incidents like this. Since they couldn't do their job, the guy said the Bureau shared partial blame. Sol felt pissed hearing it, but his boss told him to ignore the dude because he was just a YouTuber paid by big guilds to post biased trash. Sol's boss wanted him to ignore it, but since they played every dirty trick, Sol decided to make his move. He walked up to the reporter, asking if he was on a live broadcast, and the guy said yes, but wanted to know why. Sol replied he wanted everyone to hear what he had to say in real time, and screamed, asking if it felt good, getting paid to work for big guilds. He pointed at Yunwan, telling everyone the Bureau constantly cleaned up their messes. This left everyone mute, and even Yunwan couldn't say anything. Sol's boss ended up dragging him away before he caused more problems. Yunwan then asked his assistant if Sole was the same dude who was rude to him before, and the assistant confirmed it. This only made Yunwan angrier, and he told the assistant to do everything to crush him. The next day, Li-Han got called to a meeting where he learned the YouTube video from yesterday went viral. Li-Han told the officials he didn't think Sol should be punished because other articles praised him too. However, Hunihuk, chief of the Bureau's monitoring department, believed Sol had to be punished. Li-Han disagreed, saying punishment should go to Overcross or those supposed to manage them. Hunihuk asked if Li-Han seriously suggested they were incompetent, and Li-Han said exactly that. Hunihuk almost lost his temper, but the elephant in the room urged everyone to chill. The man then asked Li-Han if it was true Sol's rescue rate stayed 100%. Li-Han said yes. Since that was the case, the man said Sol was a talent they couldn't lose, because even relying on large guilds, they still had to maintain Bureau dignity. Hunihuk asked the authoritative man if he had a plan, and he replied, since the guilds decided to play funny, it was right to play along. The man calmly sipped tea while saying it, and turned out to be Park Kwang-soo, the director of the Bureau. Later, Sol got an invite from the director and headed to the office to see him. Upon entering, Kwang-soo told him to sit because they had something to discuss. Kwang-soo brewed tea for them, and after serving, asked Soleil how it tasted. Sol teased the old man, saying the tea tasted so good he should open a cafe. Kwang-soo felt glad and asked Soleil what rank he thought he would get now if he retook the test. Sol replied he couldn't say for sure, but felt confident it wouldn't be his current rank. Kwang-soo agreed, saying Sol lately achieved things no D rank could. However, Kwang-soo let him know things stayed difficult on their end too, because people tried digging up dirt on him. Deep down, Sol already worried, because he didn't know where the director headed with this. He wondered if Kwang-soo tried getting him to spill secrets while helping. Basically, Kwang-soo was a veteran in politics, which was why he held his position so long. Before coming, Lehan told Soleil to speak honestly in front of Kwang-soo and not play games because it might hurt him. Sol knew he always followed Lehan's advice, but didn't think it wise to mention the labyrinth. Just then, Kwang-soo told him to chill because he wasn't going to ask how Soleil got strong yet. Kwang-soo said what mattered most right now was that the Bureau needed his power. Without beating around the bush, he told Sol he was sending him to the countryside. At the same time, Yunwan just got discharged after learning the investigation ended. Yunwan thanked his liaison Seo and asked what he thought of Sol. Seo said he didn't know because they worked different departments, and asked why Yunwan cared so much about a mere rescue worker. Yunwan angrily replied, Soleil was a pest getting on his nerves. Seo then asked if that hatred made Yunwan decide to kick him to the countryside. Yunwan urged Seo to watch his mouth while saying he just wanted a reflection of himself. They were in the middle of this when Sol appeared behind them, asking if they were close or something. Yunwan tried acting cool, saying it seemed fate kept bringing them together. Yunwan told Sol he heard about the countryside dispatch. Sol picked his ear and blew it off casually, saying, even though the official notice wasn't out yet, he already knew. Sol teased, asking if Yunwan stalked him, but urged him not to worry, because it was just a 6-month dispatch. Yunwan mocked Sol, saying he was quite the optimist, because from what he heard, the Bureau only dispatched department head level or higher, so it didn't look like a dispatch at all. Yunwan kept talking trash when Sol cut in, saying even his spy, Seo, didn't know the important news yet. Sol admitted he planned to wait before announcing, but decided to tell them. He revealed as of that day, he got promoted from 8th grade to 6th grade, meaning he was now a senior officer thanks to the double promotion. Seo and Yunwan looked shocked, and Sol quickly teased Yunwan, saying he didn't look really happy about the promotion. Yunwan swallowed hard, saying he felt happy, but wondered if the Bureau handed out promotions without qualifications. Sol replied, this only meant the Bureau wanted to keep talents, and he was pretty sure Yunwan felt pissed things didn't go his way. This triggered Yunwan, who unleashed his aura, aiming to overwhelm, but Sol replied to the threat accordingly. Seo stepped in, telling Yunwan it was time to leave. Yunwan apologized, saying he only spaced out and wanted to be on his way. As he left, Soleil told him he had a piece of advice. Sol told Yunwan trying to break him by changing location was a big mistake, because no matter where they sent him, his job as rescue hunter didn't change. Sol said this with confidence as he walked away, and Yunwan finally lost his cool, punching the wall hard. It turned out during the meeting with Kwang-soo, he told Soleil not to worry about the dispatch. He said on the surface it looked like demotion or exile, but was nothing other than a 6-month dispatch. However, Sol would have to show results while there, which was the only way to keep outsiders from touching him. In the meeting, Kwang-soo noticed Sol spaced out and called his attention back. Sol apologized before thanking the director for looking out for him. However, he had one request and revealed since he headed to the countryside, He wanted the director to send him somewhere that actually needed his help. Kwang-soo felt blown away because he wasn't expecting that. Kwang-soo had no choice but to admit the dude was something else. Later, the rest of Seoul's colleagues heard he became a senior officer, and it shocked them hard. They asked Lehan if he knew, and he said yes because he was department head after all. They asked Lehan how they were supposed to handle rescues without Seoul, and Lehan replied they just had to do their jobs as usual. Since Seoul had 1 week before leaving, Lehan suggested they call him about the team dinner that night. The yellowhead decided to try his luck and reached out to Seoul. Surprisingly, Seoul picked up, but said he was onto something at that moment. The dude asked what it was, and Seoul replied he was clearing out a wasp nest. It turned out Seoul finally made his way to the dungeon to complete the mission, with only 72 hours left on the clock. Failure would reduce combat effectiveness against insect-type monsters by 50%. After dropping the call, Seoul stared at the queen's nest and realized she released a ton of monsters, but Seoul wasn't worried, since he could still move. Seoul made his move dashing forward, aiming to kill the queen. Suddenly, he got cut off by insect monsters known as sweep fittets, forcing him to engage them. He realized the queen made a ton of monsters lie in wait for him. These sweep fittets fired stingers like bullets, but because they took lots of energy to create the queen, usually avoided that option. Seoul wondered if the queen already had them ready. Still, he didn't think he had time to waste, because he would get surrounded eventually. However, before that, Seoul opened the labyrinth, sucking the insect monsters in, so he could handle them with labyrinth traps. With the labyrinth open, he believed he could easily reach the nest. But suddenly the insect monsters changed their pattern. Seoul felt confused, wondering if they changed to avoid getting dragged into the sphere. They flew low, which indicated they might avoid the sphere's pull. With everything the monsters pulled off, Seoul figured the queen watched him and took notes. Instead of getting pissed, Seoul actually felt honored. The queen used her tiny brain power just to kill him. Still, Seoul had his own plan. Since he couldn't respawn labyrinth monsters right now, he had no choice but to enter the labyrinth. He planned to pull in as many monsters as he could before escaping fast. Once he had direct access to the queen, he teased her to come outside and stop hiding. Suddenly, he noticed the queen's pheromones going crazy, which meant she did something worth knowing. He wondered if she called the rest of the swarm, and just to be safe, activated his sixth sense. Fortunately, he activated it at the right time to dodge an attack meant for him. It turned out the queen called for a powerful soldier she made before considered the queen's ultimate weapon. And this insect monster was known as Winglash. The Winglash forced Seoul to turn and start running. Seoul finally realized how desperate the queen was to stop him because she created such a strong beast just for him. Seoul then ran toward the sphere so he could trap the Winglash, leaving the queen open. Just as he wanted, the sphere grabbed the Winglash, keeping it in place. While the sphere tried dragging the Winglash in, Seoul went after the defenseless queen. Suddenly, he noticed the Winglash onto him again. He managed to turn just in time to block the monster's attack. The Winglash knocked him to the ground, and this was when Seoul realized the beast actually tore off its own arm just to escape the sphere's pull. While the Winglash held him down, the queen provided encouragement. Realizing how stubborn both were, Seoul decided to pull all of them into the labyrinth. Even though things didn't go as planned, he wasn't worried, because the two were now trapped in his domain. Seoul teased them, telling them not to move if they liked themselves. He was about to explain why they shouldn't move when he realized he spoke to monsters, and this made him sound crazy. Seoul then went into his inventory to activate the trap steel rain. This unleashed a ton of arrows from the front, but the Winglash deflected everything with its wings. Seoul felt impressed because he finally understood why the monster was called Winglash. However, Winglash wasn't safe yet, because arrows weren't coming from only one direction, and before the monster knew, it got torn apart from behind by arrows flying toward it. Soul then reminded the queen he already told her all her efforts would be in vain the moment they stepped into his domain, because he packed the place with traps just to deal with monsters like her. Now that her ultimate weapon was gone, they were the only ones left. Soul prepared to attack the queen, but knew her armor was strong enough to deflect his spear, so he didn't waste time poking it. Soul changed direction to try finding a soft spot where he could destroy the queen from. However, the queen still blocked his attack from this direction, pushing him backward. Soul felt surprised the queen tried her best not to go down easy. Even though he had 3 days left for the quest, he still wanted to finish everything right there. In addition, if he left the labyrinth just because he had time, it would look like he ran from the queen. Soul then activated a trapdoor that shattered some of the queen's limbs. Soul prepared to attack the queen with a powerful martial skill. This was the first time he would use the skill, but he didn't mind, because it was against the queen, which felt pretty good. With the queen totally open and unable to move, Soul dashed toward her with the Crimson Lotus skill that unleashed massive energy, leaving a big hole in the queen. With this, the queen was defeated, and Soul got a congratulatory message, telling him he defeated the queen. Soul panted from the energy he expended using the skill. He suffered a burn in his hand, and staring at it realized just how weak he had been up to that point, but believed there was no more running from him. The system then informed him the quest reward had been sent to his inventory. Soul decided to check the rewards and realized he got a poison stinger, which was a rare item. It had a unique effect that allowed it to paralyze monsters of 2 stars or below. However, the effectiveness dropped significantly for monsters that were 3 stars and above. Soul realized this was something he could use in certain situations. However, the other reward concerned him most. The other reward was the Queen's Royal Jelly, which was also rare. It had a single use, and upon consumption, it altered one's constitution to drastically increase mana sensitivity, but there were side effects. Soul remembered activating a trap consumed lots of mana, so it made sense to increase his mana. Soul then bit down on the royal jelly, consuming it all at once. This immediately released condensed mana into his body. The mana felt so overwhelming it tried forcing itself out, but Soul wasn't about to allow that, since he worked hard to get it. Soul figured he had to circulate the mana's flow with his breathing as much as possible, so he could force the blood vessels to accept the true ki. By doing this, Soul calmed the mana storm, and the system congratulated him, telling him he transformed into a special constitution, the Myriad Soul's Peach Blossom Physique. Soul realized his bodily senses increased and felt pleased because it all came from a single piece of royal jelly. Soul checked his stats and realized they increased a whole lot. Soul felt glad because he reaped the rewards of putting his life on the line. However, he remembered there were side effects. Instead of finding out what they were, Soul decided to ignore it, saying he would think about it later because the main event was about to start, and this was the incorporation of Labyrinth monsters. Soul realized only a few red goblins remained in the labyrinth, and no matter how strong he thought he was, he couldn't take on certain monsters all by himself, which was why he needed to restock. He stored up eggs, and just then the system told him a beehive was treated as a single entity, and the system recommended he install the Lake of Decay. This was a new trap unlocked by defeating the queen. It submerged the corpse of a monster or awakened in the lake, and the corpse's experience, points, or traits transferred to a designated labyrinth monster. This meant if he targeted the Lake of Decay's effect on the beehive, all the eggs in there would grow stronger at once. Without wasting time, Soul proceeded with this, and was left to decide which one he was supposed to make the boss monster. Soul found his choice, and it was one bigger than the others. Soul smiled as he named the boss Vespa, while promising to bring him nice treats. Later on, Soul met for a night out at the request of Young Hai. However, Soul and his colleague got there before her. The dude asked Soul what he was up to, and he replied he was spending the rest of his time getting food for the guy he was raising. The dude had no idea what he was saying and asked if he was raising some sort of exotic pet. It turned out Soul had gone to retake the rank test because the director asked for it. His colleague considered him a weirdo because others would have spent their time off on vacations and the like. Just then, the dude mentioned the women were staring at him, and he quickly rode the wave to talk about how handsome he was. Moments later, Young Hai showed up and Soul was still trashing her for coming late when he realized her nose was bleeding.